killer in season 11 of American Horror Story is inspired by a very real case. If you're a Forensic Files fan like myself, then you start to connect the dots. In 1991, a sanitation worker is collecting trash along the New Jersey Turnpike when he picks up a bag so heavy he decides to look inside. When he opens the bag, he finds a human head. Police then arrive on scene and they begin to find more bags of body parts. The body was severed into 7 pieces: 2 arms, 2 legs, upper torso, lower torso, and head. There was ligature marks on both of the victim's wrists suggesting that he was tied up. In one of the bags they find latex gloves, a blood-stained bedsheet, a saw, and a shower curtain, suggesting that this was most likely done in a residence or a hotel. In another bag was the victim's wallet, so there was no indication to try to hide the victim's identity, making it clear that the victim was 56-year-old Thomas Mulcahy, an executive who was in New York on a business trip. He was married for 33 years, he had 4 kids, and the youngest being 18. When the medical examiner reviews his body, it's clear that he was dismembered, but before that he was stabbed. And that the bags and body parts were carefully washed before being dumped. This, of course, was to remove the evidence, but this also told police that this was a very personal act because the killer was then taking care of the victim even in death. Police then trace his credit card activity, and they see 2 days before his murder, he withdrew $200 at 11:15 p.m. They go to look at surveillance, and of course the cameras are down, so they have nothing to work with. Although witnesses recall seeing Thomas at an upscale gay bar in Manhattan called Townhouse. Witnesses recall that he was clearly very intoxicated and that he also was speaking with a white male with brown hair. No one could remember if the two actually left together. Based off eyewitness accounts, police issue a deposit sketch and nothing comes up. So again, just like the ATM camera not working and no results coming up from the composite sketch, police look elsewhere for evidence. Police then turn back to the bags that the body parts were found, and they recall there was a wrapper for the latex gloves that were inside the bag. On that wrapper was a sticker indicating that these gloves were purchased at a CVS in Staten Island. Police now had a location, which was good, but also, mind you, there were more than 500,000 people living in Staten Island at this time. Also, side note, the victim's wife comes forward and says, hey, at some point later in our marriage, my husband started to interact with same-sex relations outside the marriage. That kind of explains why he was at an upscale gay bar in Manhattan on his business trip. Anyways, a year goes by and no clues, no progress is made on the case. It's at this point that New Jersey police come across another set of bagged body parts. Just like the first case, the bags were double knotted and the body parts were broken into the same 7 pieces. Part 2 of the real-life killer who has inspired Season 11 American Horror Story. 1 year after police find Thomas Mulcahy's dismembered body, New Jersey police have another case that's identical in Manchester Township, New Jersey. Body parts of the victims were bagged in a similar fashion. The bags were double tied, double knotted, and the body was sectioned in the same 7 parts. Prints were taken and put into the system. The individual was identified as 44-year-old Anthony Marrero. His records showed that he was a gay escort. Just like the first victim, the body parts and bags were washed, so police were not able to retrieve any DNA. Anthony also had the same ligature marks on his wrists and ankles just like the first victim. So it's clear to police that this is a signature killer they're dealing with. It's somebody who continues to repeat the same behavior again and again. Cuts that were on Anthony's body were disarticulated, in that the killer did not just cut through the bone. They actually pulled the joints apart so they could cut through cartilage compared to the bone. Precision of these cuts tells police that this had to be done by somebody who had a basic understanding of the human anatomy, perhaps a medical worker. Although the biggest clue comes from the bag that actually contains Anthony's head. On it were the words President's Choice. This particular shopping bag was only sold at 9 locations, one of which happens to be Staten Island. And the store that sold this bag in Staten Island was also next to the CVS that sold the rubber gloves that were found from the first victim. Because of this, police could start to map out the killer's comfort zone. Killer most likely works or lives in the neighborhood since they are comfortable in that location. Using a process called superglue fuming, investigators are able to lift 2 partial prints and a partial palm print from the bags. Police run the prints and nothing comes back. So again, there are no leads. 2 months later, another victim's body is found in a garbage can only 12 miles outside of New York. The witness looked down in the garbage can and literally saw just 2 folded arms neatly at the top.
Down in the garbage can there was a couple arms, folded up neatly.
The body, just like the others, was dismembered in the same 7 sections. And bags were double knotted, they were washed down, there were no prints. The third victim turns out to be 56-year-old Mike Sakara, a well-known regular at the Five Oaks bar in Greenwich Village. Now this bar, like the others, tends to cater to the gay clientele. The employees there know him very well. And this woman right here, Lisa Hall, was the bartender that night. She recalls a man that approaches Michael and sits down right next to him. She actually thought they were friends because he walked right over and sat next to him in an empty bar. Lisa makes this man a scotch and water, and Michael introduces him as so-and-so and says, "This is my friend, he works as a nurse at St. Vincent's Hospital." This is a key clue for the investigators. When police follow up with St. Vincent's, they identify 38-year-old Mark Slayton. Mark lived in Staten Island and was near the location of where the gloves from the first crime scene were purchased. Also, police say he looks like the composite drawing, which I don't know about. When they compare his prints to those that were found on the bags from the first crime scene, it's not a match. Detectives now are thinking this guy probably lied to the bartender and his victims about the location that he actually works. So Detective Kuhn requests help from his kids. He has them drop off flyers with the composite drawings to all the local hospitals in Staten Island. Unfortunately, this generates no leads. And again, the case goes cold. Suddenly, after the first 3 victims, murder stopped. Police wonder, did he move? Did he get arrested? Did he just get better at what he was doing? 8 years go by and a new fingerprint technique comes out. The process is called VMD, which stands for Vacuum Metal Deposition. This process helps find fingerprints on non-porous materials, even if the material is old. So detectives send a dozen bags to a lab in Toronto, where the bags are exposed to 10 milligrams, about 20 cents worth of gold. The gold is heated to 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, where it turns into a gas. The gold vapor then creates a film over the surface that's being tested, but this is invisible to see with the eye. So then zinc is introduced to the chamber where it adheres to the gold itself, where it locks any prints in place to be photographed, producing a negative fingerprint. This VMD process yields 16 partial prints from the first and second murder. And these partial prints were even better than those that were first found. They go to enter the prints into the system and nothing comes back. But Detective Kuhn is not discouraged. He knows that not every state has switched over to uploading all of their fingerprints into this new database at the time. So he sends hard copies of the prints with a cover letter to each state. That's where latent print examiner Kim Stevens blows the lid off this case. All of Maine's fingerprints were not in the database yet. Expecting no results, she enters the prints into Maine's database. 30 possible matches come up. So she compares each of the 30 prints side by side. After countless hours, she finally finds a print that matches. She sends it to another expert to also confirm her findings. The expert agrees and it turns out to be Richard Rogers, a former graduate student from Maine. His prints were in the database because in 1973, Richard actually killed his roommate with a hammer. Then claimed self-defense because the guy hit on him. Okay. And he got acquitted! He then moved to New York and got a nursing degree. Police then arrest him at work.